The project that I was involved in is, it's really about using muslin from the 17th to the 19th century, and so it was from the east to west, sort of coming together. I'll just go through it. Sorry, is that how you?
So that's the right.
All right, okay.
If you pointed there.
So just a bit of the background to the project. There was 12 volunteers that was recruited by Mohammed, and we were called the Heritage Fashion Recreators. We all came from various backgrounds, and we all had different sort of abilities of textile, sewing, and interest as well, so from beginners to advanced. My background is I actually work in the NHS as a commissioning manager at the moment. I manage a number of different services for older people services in Croydon, and I'm also studying as well. I'm doing a psychotherapy course. I'm in the third year, and I've got one more year to go, so hopefully I'll get that done as well. But the reason why this really caught my eyes, this was back in 2014 time, was I did GCSE and A-level textiles, and I completely forgot all about that really, and I forgot how much I really enjoyed it, and this really caught my eyes. I was thinking, oh, what's this about? So it was a real pull towards kind of touching on what I enjoyed back, in those early days, really. Sorry, getting used to this. Just a little bit of background to that era. You probably already know or gathered around this period. So Bengal supplied a range of textiles to the world within the early decades of the 19th century. There were sort of political changes, and the British conquest of Bengal started the cause of the decline of Bengal textile. And what really hit Bengal was the Industrial Revolution, particularly when Britain started manufacturing their own cotton materials, and the East Indian Company stopped importing textile goods from Bengal. But however, now there has been a revival of increased interest in the history of Bengal textiles, particularly from researchers and individuals who are interested in textiles, and that's sort of really in the last sort of in recent years, I would definitely say it's really picked up. Just a brief definition. I mean, if you know what muslin is, that's great. It's a really fine fabric. I've actually brought a sample, and I'm happy to sort of pass this around if you want to have a little feel and pass that around. So it's a cotton-based fabric. It's plain weave. And this particular sample that's going around, Mohammed commissioned a place in Dhaka or in Bangladesh. The count thread is 80, so it's not the finest, because the count thread can be up to 200 and 300 in the original sort of 17th to 19th century period, but this is what we got to work with in the project. Just some sort of names as to the names and the qualities of muslins that you can have or find. I won't go through all of them, but the first one, Malmal, is like the softest, the finest sort. And I'll just point out halfway down, Casa, which is special quality, fine or elegant. And I get a sense that the dress that I've picked or selected, I have a sense that it might be of that sort of quality simply because of how it looked to me. But you had other different types, so like you had the Sherbaan, which you might recognize turbans for, or the Kumis used for making shirts. So the project training really consisted of a 3-day training course by the London College of Fashion, and that this introduced us to the concepts and designing of a garment, of a product, and we had to learn how to do sketching. We did draping using calico fabric, and we did a whole variety of we drew sort of a whole set of outfits to completion. So for example, if you wanted to do a catwalk, you would have a whole collection of garments produced. So we went through that process of getting to that finished sort of idea. We had a number of different visits to museums. The Museum of London, we saw 25 full completed garments. That's very historic, and we learnt about how they were actually constructed, literally from, we couldn't touch the garments, but we were shown how the seams were being done and how the buttons were being put on, and the embroidery as well. So it really was really interesting. At the Victoria and Albert Museum, we saw actual muslin fabrics, and we understood more about the history between what was being shipped between East and West. The Maritime Museum as well, we went there and we had a tour, and they talked about the East Indian Company and the trading systems there. We also visited the British Library, which was supposed to support us in our research of the garments that we decided to do. And we also visited Razia Wahid, who is actually a weaver herself. She's based in the UK, in London, and she has a hand loom. So this is her professional trade. So she actually gets commissioned to do pieces of fabric, but which she herself weaves amazingly. So just a couple of pictures here. The first is the London College of Fashion. You can see some of the fashion recreators, and we're actually starting to do a bit of a collage of an idea of an item of clothing that we might be interested in. And in the second one is at the National Maritime Museum, where we're looking at historic catalogue books of tradings and what the various the ships would be carrying, information about that. So this is the dress I finally got drawn to, and it's actually found at the V&A Museum. The little inscription is that it's Bengal Muslin embroidered dress from 1795, and the museum number there is what you need to plug into the V&A website, and you just get a bit of a description as to what it is. I think I've just put a little extract in here from the book. Sorry, should be more organized.
Do you know the date of this dress?
1795, yeah. So basically, what drew me to it really was the fact that it was just so elegant and it's so fine. And I love the gold embroidery, which is made from, it's sort of a silk thread. And you could say sort of cross, it's called tambour or a cross stitch, stitching wise. And it had, you can't quite, in the next, so you can see the top one there, it gives you, you can see the gatherings of the back of the dress. And then the second picture there shows you the trail. But it was reams and reams and reams of yards of fabric. And my understanding is that this was one piece of fabric. There was so much fabric, you would think it's quite amazing to be working to make that whole dress with one piece of fabric. I couldn't do that, obviously, because our pieces of fabric was commissioned to a certain width and length, and therefore some of the challenges I had to deal with was how do I put the pieces of fabrics together to make it look as if it was one piece. Now, it was actually very difficult to find any information on the actual dress itself. The bit of information I got from the V&A archive was that this dress was given by a Mrs. M.E. Wingfield in 1961. The literature that they have is very thin. There was only a few letters of correspondence between herself and George Wingfield Whigby. Not quite sure if they're related in any way, but I don't think so, who worked at the V&A during that time. And it was sort of stated in the letters that Mrs. Wigfield had about 18 different items that she was asking the V&A to take if they were interested. So there was a number of dresses, nightshirts, bodices, and silk fabrics. The only thing that they actually took was this piece of dress. This dress was the only thing that they took. So let me just get to that page. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of say that, So I imagine this dress, because there was not a lot of historic information about the person who wore it or what kind of, where it would be worn. I basically did some general research around the period, and because this dress was produced around the Regency time, so there's a lot of sort of French influences there. Women wore dresses with empire waistlines. This style of dress allowed women to discard the previous popular undergarments, such as traditional waist-narrowing corsets and panniers and bustles. I imagine this dress, with its gold embroidery, would have been worn with some form of stays or corsets, with a chemise underneath it, and maybe drawers or a pantaloon on the legs. They would have had an underdress or a petticoat, or perhaps both, although due to the trail of the dress, it suggests more of an evening dress, worn up to a ball, or with an underdress to puff up the skirt. The wearer's shoes would have been slippers with very low kitten heels and pointy toes, accompanied by a cashmere shawl. This was my sort of surmise as to how I saw this dress being worn and wear, sort of thing. So through the journey of this project, once we had identified the garment that we wanted to make, we then had to draw it up to scale, so every element of it. So this is just an example of the cuff and the embroidered part. I literally had to do lots of measurements as accurately as possible. So we had to take lots of pictures of the actual garments. We had to blow them up just so that we could scale the patterns and designs. And then the reason why is that because I got the embroidery part of the dress commissioned out in Bangladesh for them to actually do the embroidery. They needed to know exactly what the design was going to be and how, to what measurements. And each part of the dress, so if you remember the long trail down the middle of the dress, there was embroidery around the bust area and the cuffs as well. All of these different elements had to be scaled and drawn to be then sent to Bangladesh to the people who were going to do this piece of work for us. So just a few pictures here. So the first one, so this took quite a long time actually, and that was a bit of a challenge because we couldn't start working on the dresses until we got the fabric. So that was a bit of a challenge. It did take longer than expected, but they were weaving a lot of fabric for all 12 participants. And also if each of us had different elements, additional, like I had the embroidery, other people would have had other elements they wanted incorporated. So there might have been printing involved, or there might have been more embroidered body, etc. So it all took a lot of time to do that. So this, on the left-hand side, this was when we got the fabrics, and we were all incredibly excited, and we were all just really impressed with the quality and just the yards and yards of fabric. It was amazing. And you can, I don't know if you can see, but one in the front, there's it's got sort of a red sort of pattern on it, and then everyone's just really intrigued and really excited. And then on the other picture is we're starting to actually cut into the fabric, and that was quite nerve-wracking to cut into the fabric because we only had a limited amount. So if you get it wrong, that was it. But Lewis Westing was the tailor, who's the English gentleman in that picture, and Alice Gordon was the seamstress. And with their support, effectively, we really got through. They knew the historical costumes of that time. Lewis actually did the patterns for those periods as well. And each of us had different types of patterns. So it wasn't just one pattern for one participant. He produced different types of patterns because we'd have different shapes and sizes to fit different styles of the dresses that we were all producing. So, and then they would be guiding us, in regards to, well, how do we stitch? Because back in those days, they didn't have sewing machines. Everything was done by hand, and that's part of this whole project, is that it's about recreating. So we were trying to be as authentic as possible to that. So with their support, this is the journey of actually starting to make the dress. So at the top there, you can't probably see it, but because the fabric is incredibly fine, so the pieces, that single line there, that is meant to be a seam. So if you think about the clothes that you wear, all the seams, it's all done by machine. This is all done by hand. So we had to create a seam, and it was not easy. If you think of two sort of like pieces like that, one had to be halved, and then the other one would fold over it, and then you'd have to stitch all the way along. So if you think of a full length of dress or skirt, that is a lot of stitching to do. And then the hem took even longer, and the stitchings were so because of the thread, the fabric is, because it's quite holey really. If you feel your own clothes, it's a bit thick, so one stitch should work, but because it's so fine, you had to really, you couldn't just do like a running stitch, for example, where you have lots of gaps in between, because otherwise it just wouldn't look right, wouldn't have that finished look. So that took me an incredibly long time to do the hem, to do any of the sewing actually, But then the problem I occurred with the hem and the embroidery is that it wasn't long enough. So how do I overlap and match all the different patterns in the right way? So these were all sort of different challenges that I had to overcome and work through with the support of Lewis and Alice. At the bottom is just showing a spread of the bodice part of the garment, and there's so many different pieces. It was very confusing, and it's really not a simple. It was not a simple task to do that bodice. So yeah, it's just a photograph there of Lewis talking to me, and I'm concentrating really hard as he's trying to explain an element of the bodice there. But it's really quite surprising how each stage, you think you've just done the hem, okay, fantastic. Now we've cut the bodice, there's more problems, as to do, because the bodice wasn't just that fine fabric that you've just been passed around. We had to use we had to have some coverage. So, we used calico in between, like a sandwich, basically. So you had a thin layer of muslin, calico, and then another thin layer of muslin. And that's actually quite hard to sew. I mean, if you think of a needle, we were only using the basic needles that we get, in the shops. And so it's quite painful on the fingers, and it's incredibly slow to even do, a few centimeters of it. If you're not used to it, it's not easy. So then, doing all these various bits and pieces, it was joining the top half with the bottom half. And I have to say, it was again, I was thinking, almost there, but actually it was not an easy job. The skirt part, the gathering of the skirt took a long time. And you had to I had to sort of make sure all the gathering was sort of equal around the space that it's meant to cover. And then again, the sewing of it all, because it just became thicker and thicker. It was really difficult, and we had to put different levels of facing to cover obviously the unseen bits that you don't want to see. So it was hard work to do that, and you can see some of the gatherings on the front bodice on the bottom picture as well, and that took some time to do as well. So just a bit more about this bodice. You can see that there's a sort of like a front bib, which is sort of out, and then inside it's almost like a bra kind of thing with a tie at the front. Now, this was really, really interesting, and I love this concept, really. The reason why there was a flap over the inside part of the bodice is because ladies who had children, for instance, and they needed to feed them, it would be easily that they just take off the front part of the bodice bib and then be able to nurse their children and then discreetly cover themselves up again, which, I mean, it's quite an amazing sort of thing. So, and this wasn't fastened. I didn't have to put any other sort of fastening on it. All they would use is a pin. So that front panel, when it goes back onto the bodice, the chest part, is only held up with a pin, and that's it. So I thought it's quite a lovely little thing to know, really. And this is it. This is what I completed. And yeah, I have to say I'm really pleased with the way it came out. There was a lot of nights and a lot of hours being poured into doing those, sewing those stitching, but I think it looks fantastic, and all of the other participants as well that was involved, they were really chuffed with all of their garments that they made, and it was a real sense of incredible achievement. So I'm very happy with this. And this is the back. So you can see all the embroidered parts along the hem, the wrist, along the back there, and we saw the front. All of that had to be sort of appliqued on top of the fabric, because they came as separate bits. As mentioned, they were commissioned to do separately. Whereas I think back in the 18th century, that would have probably have been one piece. They would not have been applying it onto another fabric. It would have been part of the work of the weaving. So as you're weaving, you would probably be also putting the embroidery elements in there as well. So what happened afterwards? We presented at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, and we did a presentation. All 12 participants were in a panel. It was really incredibly an exciting evening. All of our garments were displayed on mannequins. It was like, stepping back in time almost, and people were just weaving in and out of all the different the garments that was being displayed, and then at the end of it we had sort of like a Q&A type session on the project with our friends and families and audience such as yourselves who came that evening. We also displayed at Strawberry Hill in West London as well, and I don't know if you know of the Strawberry Hill. I think is it a castle, Mohammed? I'm not quite sure. It's like a stately home. It's a stately home. It's a beautiful stately home, actually, and lovely groundings. But inside was perfect because it really had the decor of that sort of 18th century period. High ceilings, beautiful architecture. It had gold and this pale blue sort of colouring throughout the rooms. It was a real sort of regal kind of Regency kind of feel. And so we displayed all of these, all of our garments along in this hall, and you could just imagine it was like a ball basically, and all these mannequins were talking to each other and having some conversations. And there was another event here as well. And then in 2016, I was also involved in another project around muslin, and Mohammed took these our garments from this project, and we got to put them in the Dhaka Museum for the Muslin Festival, which lasted a week out there, and it was also displayed, that's meant to be North and West sort of university in Dhaka as well during that period. There's been a few other events as well, which I believe Mohammed's taken it on tour, so to speak. But yeah, so that's basically it. So I would just say that it was a really incredibly fun project to be working on. It really reintroduced me to having some fun, literally, and touching my creative side, and I want to do more creative things. Life is quite serious, and this really kind of takes you out of that box, and yeah, just, that's it.
Good, thank you. Do we have any questions, please? Thank you, Emma.
Sounds like an amazing journey, and one requiring a lot of patience, on which I congratulate you. How long did this take from beginning to end?
This project was meant to be for 12 months, but it did take about sort of 18 months or so to finish. I think that because of a number of delays, like with the fabric coming back to us, and then each one of us, we all had to write our chapters for the book as well. So there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and so just compiling it all together, it did take a bit longer. But
And the hours sewing?
Oh God, don't know. I can't. I literally, I think for 6 months I was sewing every night. I can't tell you how many hours, but wherever I got the chance, I would be having to sew. And I think, looking back on it, maybe I could have taken a little bit, I could have been a bit more relaxed with myself with the stitching, but I don't think I was allowing myself. It had to be, literally millimetre by millimetre, and that was painstaking, actually.
And was there much unpicking?
There was some unpicking, and believe you me, I felt like crying because it was just so painful. I mean, oh God, the thought of unpicking it, because it's so fine. You had to be very careful that you weren't cutting the fabric rather than just trying to catch the thread. So it really took a lot of precision, sort of thing, and being careful. And then I think there was one moment, it was on the bodice, and it was a dart, how to shape the bodice part. And I could see that it was going slightly wonky, and I was thinking, oh God, I know what's going to happen. But I persevered to thinking, maybe Willis won't notice. But of course, he told me, and I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe it. So it was really, really painful because it was so hard to sew. That the thickness of the fabric was really hard. So yeah, it was a bit painful when you had to do that.
Can I just make one piece of clarification? See, the project was originally for 18 months.
Oh,
but
sorry.
we had like an open day and recruiting volunteers, publicizing that took a couple of months. After they came on board, we had a bit more than a month, sorry, a year to finish. Actually, the whole project took 23 months. But from your point of view, probably about 18 months in total. The other thing is that, we didn't manage to take the exhibition to North-South University because when we were planning, there was an issue. It's not Dhaka Museum, it was the Museum of National Museum of Bangladesh in Shahbag in Dhaka. And I don't know if people know DRIP. It's a famous art gallery in Bangladesh, it's the premier art gallery, and they took an interest in our project. When we finished our project, they, I gave them a copy of the book, and then they decided that this is such an important project, so they will do somebody got inspired, and they got crazy for 2 years, and they produced something so wonderful. There's a book, but that incredible, you can buy it on Amazon. It's called Muslin, Legend of the Loom or something, right? And they, the guy who was instrumental in the Drake project, he went positively mad, on this project. He went all over the world, America, Turkey, India, just following the trade of the Muslim fabric. So they put on an exhibition in Dhaka, and I was there, and literally every day thousands of people were visiting this museum, right? And it was so wonderful.
If the decline that people are talking about is actually a very recent decline, because I looked at, even in the 1980s and early 90s, there were people, every household had women making silk flowers, doing embroidery, and embroidery in clothes, embroidery on they take a whole sheet or a plain thing for a tablecloth, and we're doing embroidery often in groups, doing nokshikata style, doing cross stitches, doing quite elaborate mirroring. So the decline and the resurgence isn't just a Western academics getting really interested. This is a very recent decline that now academics and a few people are getting interested in trying to pop up. But I would say that the decline is very recent from my observations and my experience, because I've actually travelled around Bangladesh and I've seen in every village, and also in Dhaka, around the cities, every household were, and you had streets full of I mean, a different type of work, but bamboo and cane furniture, whole streets where everybody was doing it. And every household had people who were doing embroidery and clothes and other things with fabrics, doing macrame work, creating lace. So it was actually quite ubiquitous until very, very recently.
Thank you. I just sort of interject that in regards to where I'm coming from, it's the link, I guess, with the East Indian company and basically around the muslin itself, and that's what I've just read on. But thank you for
from a sort of a practical on the ground in Bangladesh, actually
sure.
the embroidery skills that would have been employed,
Yeah.
the things that would have been embroidered on later, was actually very, very ubiquitous in Bangladesh. And it's only a very recent decline, and you don't now see every household where a woman does embroidery regularly, but that's a very recent change. And Jamdani was very, I mean, you'd see very prolific Jamdani in every store. In certain areas you see quite elaborate designs of Jamdani. So I think encouraging new designs is great, but putting it in the context of Dhaka society, it's not this encouragement isn't a recent thing. I would say that's been going on for a long time. I've seen some amazing designs that have been back in the 80s that were very elaborate, very astonishing designs, and there was quite a lot of sari weaving and other things going on. So it's great that there is a resurgence again, but I think the decline is quite recent for entirely different reasons.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Invited us to display our garments, 8 of them, in quite a central area, but it was a small part of this massive exhibition they imported from India, 200, 300 count thread, because Bangladesh we don't produce, The Indians some Indians, they still have skill in producing by hand, 200, 300 count thread. So then they employed weavers, in Dhaka who work on Jamdani, right? And they produce full saris. It took them like 6 months using 200 or 300 count thread. It was really wonderful, and we were happy that we were invited to participate in that. And so there was this issue. We were going to take it to North-South first, but Rick said, no, you can only display in Bangladesh first time. You already displayed and you cannot come to us. So we had this issue, right? So we decided to be part of the Muslin festival in Bangladesh, which ran for I think more than a month. I think originally it was a month, but I think they extended. And literally thousands of people, and there was so much interesting things in there. And I took pictures, especially of people looking at our garments. I took those, right? Just one other thing, Lucky Hossain, is some of the items that you see in the British, the Europeans imported and wore. Some of them had woven designs, right? When they are weaving, they incorporate in the design, and some embroidered afterwards, by somebody else. So there's like 2 methods. There might be more, but so some of the orders that I've got from the 12 people who participated, they wanted some woven design, I think, and some embroideries. I think all your were embroideries, right? But some others wanted woven design. One gentleman here, he produced a very beautiful waistcoat, replica, right? Basically, this project was recreating, so we wanted to recreate some item that exists from that period that people find in museums or online. But one gentleman here, he produced, he ended up producing 6 items, and most of them were like woven design, very beautiful design. So it took a lot of time.
Any more questions?
There's one in the back.
garments at the moment, and will you be showing them all again together?
I'm not quite sure. I think they're currently just being held with Mohammed, perhaps. But it would be lovely to have them displayed again. I think that's a really lovely idea. And thank you, Saif. Saif's actually one of the participants. I think, Mohammed, were you referring to Saif about the waistcoat, or yeah? So he's actually in the audience too.
In terms of, I got all of them, right? But we also took them to Matthias Church, Old Matthias Community Center, was displayed there. But one item gone missing, right? It's an item that I produced. I also got interested. I produced something. I produced what we call a scarf. There's another name. Shawl. It's a shawl. Yeah? Based on designs on Princess Charlotte's dress. Right? So I produced. Somehow that's gone missing. Somebody would like to somewhere. Right? So in terms of we would like to reprint the books, because we printed 1,000 and they're nearly all gone, and then bring this out again, because it's been like more than 5 years since the project ended, and we didn't manage to take it to a lot of the places that we wanted to take.
Okay.
Any more?
Hi.
Hi.
So I find it to be a very great end product, because you want it to be as authentic as possible. So that's why you send it back to Bengal to make sure that the embroidery is perfect. What I'm wondering is there still a large embroidery community there, like a large community who does embroidery, or is it that you have to find an artisan? Because for me, the way that I see it, to do the embroidery, there's actually machines, so some sewing machines can already do it. So back in Bangladesh, what's the situation like? Are they very modern, or they are still very traditional?
I mean, I'll try to respond a bit, but Mohammed might come in a little bit afterwards. I mean, because of the decline towards sort of after a few decades in the 19th century, due to all the political situation, the Industrial Revolution, and the simple fact that Britain was producing their own garments, and they literally stopped all purchasing from Bengal. And during that sort of wartime as well, what was happening, which isn't great, is that it was Bengal was very rich with the skills and of the different weavers and the production makers. But what they were doing is, during the wartime, they were actually cutting people's fingers off. When you weave, you need certain fingers to operate, to thread the loom. So you've got the loom, and you've got the different threads going this way, and then you've got the threads going this way, and you need it's like a needle, but it's a massive needle, wood or something, and you thread it through, and then you push the loom down, and that's how you start making a fabric. So in order to function, to do that, you need your hands and certain fingers to operate that equipment. During that sort of revolutionary time, so the weavers were being disabled to do that. So because of that, that's just one story, and I'm sure there's some lots of other issues around it as well. But I believe, and this is just from Mohammed's research in the book as well, is that there are certain towns now that have sort of grown into more skilled labour working, where more around sort of jamdani fabric making, and they're sort of in particular part of Bangladesh. So I believe it's sort of being revived a little bit, and because of the researchers in the world and individual interests, there's more sort of talks between Bengal and the West. So I think there is generating some sort of interest back in Bengal, but Mohammed, you'll probably know a bit more about it specifically.
In terms of embroidery, majority of the embroideries in Bangladesh are done with machine, right? It's easy, it's quick. But then the skills in hand embroidery is still there, and there is still a level of demand, because when I went to see certain places, you see so many people using this method called because something like that, and then I forgot the method. Yeah, there's still, and also now with a lot of awareness and dedicated people trying to revive traditional arts, traditional crafts that have been sort of dying or neglected, right? Yeah? So it's coming back into like more demand for hand weaving and embroidery and so on. What we did with this project, we decided that everything has to be done by hand, and so nobody could. Some people wanted to use sewing machine, right, to finish up there. So then we thought it wouldn't be like authentic, and people were quite happy, Sai sitting there, he worked so hard, making waistcoat. He's the only one who decided to make something for men. And I saw him day after day, just sewing and sewing and sewing. And he did so much sewing. So what I did at the end is, because I got interested, so I also produced 3 items. One sari. What I did, I tried to imagine if there were Bengali people in this country, in the 1600s, 1700s, what would they have ordered, for East India Company to bring? So they would have been influenced by fashion in this country, white muslin. So they might have ordered white sari, right? I know the white sari is associated with people losing their husbands, widows who wear mostly white and sari. But I thought they would be influenced in this country, by Western ladies, wearing white muslin dresses. So they would have probably have ordered white muslin saris, for East India Company to bring. So what I did, I looked at flower, because a lot of the dresses, that we saw in museums, full dresses, they had they were not plain, there's a lot of flowery, a lot of kind of design. So what I did, I tried to find flower drawings from 17 or 1800 that I could incorporate in this white sari. So I found something, I forgot, I think 1809, beautiful flower. So I took the flower, the picture, to the embroider in Bangladesh, and I said, can you embroider this flower on certain parts of the sari, right? And then so on. And they did, and I called it Regency sari. It's in the book actually.
Hello. It's not a question, it's more of a comment. Embroidery and traditional skills, if the decline that people are talking about is actually a very recent decline, because I looked at, even in the 1980s and early 90s, there were people, every household had women making silk flowers, doing embroidery, and embroidery in clothes, embroidery on they take a whole sheet or a plain thing for a tablecloth, and we're doing embroidery often in groups, doing Nokshikata style, doing cross stitches, doing quite elaborate mirroring. So the decline and the resurgence isn't just a Western academics getting really interested. This is a very recent decline that now academics and a few people are getting interested in trying to pop up. But I would say that the decline is very recent. From my observations and my experience, because I've actually travelled around Bangladesh and I've seen in every village and also in Dhaka, around the cities, every household were, and you had streets full of I mean, a different type of work, but you know, bamboo and cane furniture, whole streets where everybody was doing it. And every household had people who were doing embroidery and clothes and other things with fabrics, doing macrame work, creating lace. So it was actually quite ubiquitous until very, very recently.
Thank you. I just sort of interject that in regards to where I'm coming from, it's the link, I guess, with the East Indian company and basically around the muslin itself, and that's what I've just read on. But thank you for
from a sort of a practical on the ground,
ground,
in
yeah.
Bangladesh. Actually,
Sure.
the embroidery skills that would have been employed,
Yeah.
you know, the things that would have been embroidered on later, was actually very, very ubiquitous in Bangladesh. And it's only a very recent decline, and you don't now see every household where a woman does embroidery regularly, but that's a very recent change. And Jamdani was very, I mean, you'd see very prolific Jamdani in every store. In certain areas you see quite elaborate designs of Jamdani. So I think encouraging new designs is great, but putting it in the context of Dhaka society, it's not this encouragement isn't a recent thing. I would say that's been going on for a long time. I've seen some amazing designs that have been back in the 80s that were very elaborate, very astonishing designs, and there was quite a lot of sound weaving and other things going on. So it's great that there is a resurgence again, but I think the decline is quite recent for entirely different reasons.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.